So let's review the names of the various instruments made of singing glasses. First, we have goblet-style instruments, which are made up of upright wine glasses. And in the goblet-style category, we've got two. We've got the musical glasses, where these wine glasses are tuned with water, and we have the glass harp, which is tuned by grinding the glasses. And then we also have the glass harmonica, like behind me, which was Franklin's invention. So clearly Franklin's invention has to be called an harmonica because the inventor gets to name his own invention. That leaves the two goblet-style instruments, musical glasses and glass harp. Those seem like good names to me. The musical glasses are tuned with water, and the glass harp is tuned by grinding the glasses to pitch. Meanwhile, some folks are inclined to use whatever name they want for whatever instrument they want, including calling goblet-style instruments harmonicas. But in the interest of clarity and, frankly, respect for Franklin, I personally save harmonica for Franklin's invention and use musical glasses and glass harp for goblet-style instruments. I'm sometimes asked to which family of musical instruments the glass harmonica belongs. Clearly it's not brass or wind, there's no blowing involved. And it's not a string instrument either, because there are no strings involved. And it's not really percussion, you better not hit it. Technically, the glass harmonica is a friction idiophone. But in an orchestra, they'd likely put it in the percussion section because, well, where else? So what's with harmonica versus harmonica with an H? Well, the very first name Franklin gave to his invention was the glassy-chord, a good sturdy English name. But soon he changed it to harmonica, no H. Why? To answer that question, we have to go back to Franklin's work on electricity published in 1751. At that time, electricity was a major unsolved scientific problem, and Franklin was the first to propose what is in essence our modern theory, that it is some sort of weird fluid that flows from positive to negative. That this weird fluid was electrons would have to wait for another 150 years. The greatest minds in Europe, especially France and England, were wrestling with the problem, and the idea that some uneducated bumpkin in the colonies could solve the problem was, in their opinion, simply impossible. Meanwhile, in Italy, we have Padre Beccaria, a professor of physics at Turin, and he thought Franklin's ideas had real merit. So he reproduced all of Franklin's experiments, which convinced him that Franklin was right. Beccaria took Franklin's ideas and started putting some math around them, thus the very beginnings of electrical engineering. Meanwhile, not only was Franklin hampered by lack of a real education and being bumpkin colonists living on the edge of nowhere in the newfangled world, communications between the colonies and Europe were slow at best. And so Beccaria took it upon himself to champion Franklin's ideas. He had standing, a professor at a university, and proximity. He was right there in Europe. Beccaria went to bat for Franklin's ideas in a big way and was ultimately able to persuade the scientific community that Franklin was right. So here I simply must interject what is easily my favorite story about Franklin and electricity. So this is the story of putting up the first lightning rod in Siena, Italy. My book has a few sentences setting up the story, and then we have an eyewitness account. Matters came to a head in 1777 when the Grand Duke ordered lightning rods to be placed on the cathedral and the Gothic tower of the City Hall in Siena. Hot controversy divided the citizens of the little medieval city, with the Marquis Chigi on the one side and the university professors on the other. Once the rod was up, according to a contemporary report, one can say that never was a wedding day awaited with so much anxiety as was a storm by the two parties. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. A colleague at the University of Siena describes the spectacular event, and here's the quote from 1777. "It will not be easy to find a similar observation attested in all its circumstances by a large number of people who, in a thickly frequented public square in plain daylight and with all their attention, had their eyes turned toward an extremely high tower to observe the action of the conductor recently placed upon it, and who, without a long wait, had the fortune to admire, to the glory of philosophy, the intelligence and the genius of the immortal Mr. Franklin, who, extending, so to speak, his prodigious hand over the square of Siena on the 18th of April, took by the hair a horrible lightning bolt, and forced it to pass along a route mapped out by his great mind, with express orders not to damage a building on which it had so many times vented its furious strength. The people of Siena, always grateful to one who does good to humanity, are surprised that statues have so often been raised to those who have ruined cities, and that they are so seldom raised to those who preserve them. If Mr. Franklin reads the present account, he will surely find an ineffable consolation upon hearing about his fine triumph and the applause given to him by people so far from his country, who see in his marvelous lightning rod the most distinguished trophy of his immortal genius. Wow, wow, wow. And so, in 1761, we find Franklin in London. He has just invented the harmonica and wants to promote it. But duty calls him back to the colonies. So what does he do? He writes a long letter to Beccaria describing his invention in great detail. It's quite lengthy, going into great detail about how to build one. Here's a portion, and I'm quoting Franklin here. "You have doubtless heard the sweet tone that is drawn from a drinking glass by passing a wet finger round its brim. One Mr. Pickeridge, a gentleman from Ireland, was the first who thought of playing tunes formed of these tones. He collected a number of glasses of different sizes, fixed near each other on a table, and tuned them by putting into them water, more or less as each note required. The tones were brought out by passing his finger round the brims. He was unfortunately burnt there with his instrument in a fire which consumed the house he lived in. Mr. E. Delaval, a most ingenious member of our Royal Society, made one in imitation of it with a better choice and form of glasses, which was the first I saw or heard. Being charmed by the sweetness of its tones and the music he produced from it, I wished only to see the glasses disposed on a more convenient form and brought together in a narrower compass, so as to admit of a greater number of tunes, and all within reach of a hand to a person sitting before the instrument, which I accomplished." At the end of the letter, Franklin closes with, "In honor of your musical language, I have borrowed from it the name of the instrument, calling it the Armonica." Unquote. So why did Franklin write at such great length about his new invention to Beccaria? I think Franklin was hoping Beccaria would promote his harmonica the same way he promoted his electrical ideas. That didn't happen, however. Beccaria was mostly interested in physics and not so much in music. Meanwhile, it was only natural in the English-speaking world to put an H on the front. We already had the word harmonic. Then the harmonica disappeared from the mainstream musical world. So fast forward to the 20th century, and we have a marvelous glass harp player named Bruno Hoffmann, who reintroduced the 18th century glass music literature to the musical world. He toured Europe and America. Hoffmann was German by birth, and in German, Franklin's invention was called Die Glasharmonika, one big Germanic solid word. So when Hoffmann toured in English-speaking countries, it was only natural for him to break the big German word into its two English parts, glass and harmonica, and glass harmonica has stuck. Personally, I like the idea of honoring the inventor by calling it what Franklin named it, the harmonica, and even glass harmonica is okay for clarity. And also, I think it helps reduce confusion of Franklin's invention with the mouth organ harmonica, which wasn't invented until around 1850. The idea has been proposed to have the glasses rotate through a water trough so the player doesn't have to moisten their fingers. I've tried it. I mounted a large glass sideways in a slow-turning glass lathe and lifted a tray of water so the glass rotated through it. It didn't work.
It's not very deep. It's only like a half inch or so, 3/4 of an inch.
First of all, just like putting water in a wine glass changes its pitch, so does rotating a glass through a trough of water. Only because the water isn't evenly in the glass, it has an unpleasant warbling effect. Secondly, theoretically, you could pre-tune the glass so it would end up at the pitch you wanted after you put water in the trough, but now you're right back to the evaporation problem. And lastly, the glass was so sloppy wet that it was almost unplayable. Let's not have solutions that are worse than the problem. In practice, keeping your fingers moist enough to play is not an issue. The Mozart Quintet for glass harmonica, flute, oboe, viola, and cello is about 16 minutes long. There are sections in the piece where the harmonica isn't playing, giving the other instruments a turn, and that is more than enough to re-moisten the fingers. Singers have to figure out where to breathe, harmonica players have to figure out where to dip. It's just part of the deal. Meanwhile, we do have 18th century instruments that have troughs. I'm thinking they were there to catch the drips. Now that would be useful. Does the speed of rotation affect the pitch? No. These are glass bells, and their pitch is determined by the geometry of the bell, how big it is, how thick the rims are, all of that. Meanwhile, the speed of rotation does have to be just right to play it at all. If you've tried the wet finger around the wine glass, you know you have to get the speed just right. The same is true of the glass harmonica. So is the speed of rotation important? Yes, if you want it to play at all. Often I'm asked, wait a minute, Franklin didn't have a motor. To which I reply, no, he didn't. Franklin's harmonica had a foot treadle like the old sewing machines, except during thunderstorms he'd hook a kite up to it. That always gets a laugh, ha. Also, Franklin's insights into electricity laid the groundwork for electric motors, so in a way he had a hand in inventing those too. And I'm sure that if Franklin had an electric motor, he definitely would have used it instead of a foot treadle.